That's our life.
These are powered up then?
Yes.
Welcome to the Chehalem Heritage Trails Advisory Committee meeting. Second month of moving on. I'm glad you could all make it. I know Pizza Darius and there's some other ones that have been excused for various reasons. The first meeting went as kind of a lot of questions, I guess, and Jill mentioned the fact that she wanted you guys to study the trails, the Heritage Trail plan that is on our website, as well as kind of discuss what kind of subcommittees you want to form for the trail. A little background on our district. Currently, we received a grant from ODOT to construct a bridge over Hess Creek along the bypass. So that's a $1.8 million grant. And we have 2 years to complete that project. Currently we have Greenworks working with us on all the engineering and the stuff that goes behind that bridge. We did some preliminary engineering and discovery probably 2017 when we were in Friends Park surveying. We did some surveying for that site as well. So that's kind of, and we've kind of went back this year and tried to go over our trails and make them better, whether gravel, drainage. We bark chipped a bunch of trails in the district. And we continue to develop the Riley property, mostly for maintenance reasons, because it's hard to maintain anything if you can't get around it. And because that's such a large piece of property, we've had to more or less go in and create ways to get to different areas that didn't have access before. We have a group of cyclists up there, or mountain bikers. We have equestrians up there. We have lots of people walking the trails up there. It's not really well known. It's not signed yet. It's not, it's not really an official trail system. So we've got to work on mapping and signage, and we don't have a master plan up there yet, so that's going to include signage as well. We're working down at Ewing Park. We put out bids for people to help us engineer, design, and get all the permitting for bridge across Chehalem Creek, which crosses into some property that we own at Ewing. There's 11 acres down there that's not accessible by anyone. So we're hoping to get that started. That will create another, I don't know, 1/3 of a mile loop down there. The intent is to build an extension of the disc golf, allow them to use that while putting a perimeter trail around the area. It is a wetlands, and at one time it looked like it was farmed, but I don't know how recent that was. So that's kind of where we're at. I know what do you say, sponsored a survey for the trails in Yamhill County, specifically the Yamhill Trail, and found out some answers, basically general answers in the county, what people were looking for, and that should be a guide to you as well. I know everyone has their little niche or trails that they like to use, and it's good to have all the ideas, but we've got to talk about where we are, what we want to focus on, who we want to get to help us. There's community outreach to do. There's a lot of different easements that might have to be addressed as far as connecting all these trails together. There are, there's city property that they've said to us that they would grant us easements in their right of ways where they have to get down in the creeks and do, they have a lot of, I guess, utilities within those drainways, and they need access to them as well. And I don't think walking trails is a bad thing down there. I just don't think we're going to have vehicular trails. So I know Jill couldn't be here tonight. So, she mentioned 3 tiers of approaches last week, the conceptual, visioning, financing, grants, having a backup for a volunteer maintenance group. And I believe Kat Ricker is our communications coordinator, and she has a list of a lot of people that we've contacted over the years or contacted us for opportunities to see. Most of them are willing to help, and we said we brought this committee together to kind of help focus the district on doing what's right for the interests. So there's trails by location. I mentioned a few. I know there's others out there. We've talked to a lot of people about different areas. I know someone wanted to do a presentation tonight on, or that's on the next board meeting.
Right, next board meeting, but that's been canceled.
Oh, that's been canceled.
Yes.
Yeah, I postponed that. I would love to talk about
Yes.
Chehalem Mountain Trails in the future.
Okay.
Right.
So I'm going to let Don speak a little bit now, because he has some other things that you might want to know for interest's sake, and be able to outreach to the community if we would like to do so.
I'd like to probably bring you a little bit about the past. This whole concept started in the 80s. We met over at Shampooey State Park with state parks. Wilsonville was there, Woodburn, different communities. Portland sent representation from Metro. The idea was the Willamette Greenway plan for a trail. As you well know, currently there is a trail from Shampooey to Buttesville going to go to Wilsonville. And the idea was, okay, what about Newburgh and Dundee? So the idea was, how do we get a trail for connecting Newburgh, Dundee, and Shampooey? In the meantime, we went out in the community. We talked to various people in the community. For a better term, I'll say river to hills. In other words, it was brought up, let's develop trails from the river up into the hills and do the connection. The main thoroughfare was going to be along the river. Now, please understand, this was way before the bypass was discussed or even thought about. Nobody knew about the bypass at that time. We knew there was going to be a bypass, but where, when, nobody had any clue. There was no committees, no nothing. As the committee for the bypass formed, we kind of saw an opportunity there working with ODOT because the bypass kind of went along the river there. It wasn't ideal, but it provided opportunities for securing funding, which we needed. So the idea was to do that. And we met with the Oregon Department of Transportation. Our board met with their board. They met. We also met with the State Park and Rec Board. They had a meeting in Newburgh. The reason for that is we had brought in Trust for Public Lands. And Trust for Public Lands had decided that they were interested in the project and they were also interested in Ash Island. What was going to be done with Ash Island and how was that going to be done? There was surveys done by Trust for Public Lands. The number one issue out of that was naturally trails. It was by far the one thing that the community wanted and they needed. The support was probably 70 and 80%, which is exactly what the last survey showed. Nobody was opposed to trails, not that many. And it was so because of that, we began to reach out. We reached out to some of the Dundee wineries and stuff. We said, how do we connect up to the the monastery, the abbey? How do we hook up to that and how do we get there? And we looked at that in Dundee and we began to discuss it. We made it known what we wanted to do and we met, and I believe you could probably address this as well as I could, that the wineries are pretty much on board. When I say on board, they're not opposed to it. They have concerns like how do we handle the spraying? What do we do? And we discussed it with them and we said we can close it down. And we talked about various things. So that was just a contact. We have pushed this along in the community from time to time. Recently, we got the grant to build the first big bridge. That's going to be the costly deal of connecting, connecting Newburgh and Dundee. That connection, the idea is we make that connection, we then connect to the river, we use the existing old bridge to go across, then we get with Marion County.
Existing old bridge, highway bridge?
Right.
The old Wynuski Bridge?
That's correct. And we get, the city owns that land over there that connects. We met with some of the property owners over there. What their comment was, Don, if you try to go along the river over here, we'll fight you. If you want to use the roadway, we'll probably support you and we will do that. So State Parks and I met with them.
That's
So
between the highway bridge and Champoeg?
right,
It's an existing bike route.
that's correct. So the idea was just to do some preliminary work and understand where people were. The long term is, again, we'll have to readdress that. People change. Most of the people have not changed, but a few has. So we'll have to readdress that. But we kind of wanted to get a feeling from some of the main property owners along there, what their feelings were.
It's the parishes, isn't it?
Yes, and also the Austins. They own a lot of land along there. So we wanted a brief idea how we were going to approach it. At the time, State Parks was interested in the connection, and I think they still are. As you know, they've changed administrators 2 or 3 times since then. So we'll have to go back and do a little legwork, but fortunately, they still have the notes from the old meetings and stuff. So Dennis Wiley was very instrumental. Matter of fact, I talked to him not too long ago. But you can see that we're kind of been laying the framework for this whole thing. We decided that maybe we should form an advisory committee to work with the board and to look into this. An example, we did the same identical thing with the pool. Jim's here. We kind of formed a pool committee. We visited, I don't know, how many pools, Jim?
Lots.
Lot. We learned a lot by the visitations too, which a number of years ago, I took a whole busload of people. Margie Lamass, I remember other people, Keith Hay. Keith has passed on, but there was a busload, and we went down to Corvallis, Eugene, looking at their pathways, asking questions, meeting with their staff. And it was very interesting. We learned an awful lot. An example, one of the things we learned is Eugene and Portland said if they had to do it all over again, they would never condemn land. They thought putting the pathway in, there were people opposed to it. So they didn't want it to go through their land. So they condemned it. They said, bad. Worst thing they ever did. They should have waited. An example, in your plan, we have a map that shows along Hess Creek which property owners were in favor and which ones were opposed. Since that was done, probably 8 years ago, 10 years
At
ago,
least 10 years ago.
The strategic
People-
plan was 2010.
right, people have passed on. Now, some of the red dots have turned to green dots. That goes to show you how things go. So you build a little bit at the time, and you find ways to put people in, and patience, I think, pays off long term. So the board put it out there and said, we'll do no condemnation. And I think that was smart. And that wasn't based on our ideas. That was based on ideas that we gathered from other people throughout the region. So we wanted to make sure that we got as much information as possible. We had champions. Keith Hay went out early on. he wanted to get this trail system going. I felt it was a little early. I told Keith that we had not done enough legwork, but he wanted to go. As a matter of fact, there was ordinances passed that said in our drainways and stuff, no paths or trails can exist. That was a reaction. That's how things go.
What's a drainway? Like the shoulder drainways?
Right.
Down
What
at- yeah.
what occurred was some people felt that they could stop it. So they went to the city. What I did was not overreact. I waited. What now? That's gone away. It just disappeared. All of a sudden, the ordinances and things changed. But it took a little bit of work behind the scenes by working with the cities and working with various property owners and other people. So you can begin to see how things cycle. So now this committee will answer directly to the board. One of the things I've learned is for the committee, know your purpose. Clearly state what your purpose is. Agree on the purpose. What is the structure? And does the structure support what you're trying to do? For instance, you answer directly to the board. You're an advisory committee. Our job as a staff is to be technical advice for you, to work with you, to answer your questions, to get the information that you need. The third element is establishing relationships. We must know who our partners are, list those partners, establish relationships with them. Also, peers. Peers I will define as people opposed to what we're trying to do or what you're trying to do. They're very important. We must establish a relationship with them. And that relationship must be by which to listen, concern, and working with them to make this the best that we can do it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but you should always make the effort. So understand relationships are very important. The fourth element will be the helpful mechanisms. What do you need as a committee? What do we need to make this work? And what are those mechanisms? And the last and the most important is the rewards and benefits. How are they measured? How are we going to measure what we do? And how should we measure that? Is it the length of trails? Is that one of the measurements? Is it establishing more partners? Getting more peers involved? How do we measure? What is the benefits of that? And how do we measure those? That's going to be important. Last but not least is the leadership. Where is the leadership in the community? Not only in this group, but in the community that we can put together to make that done. If we look at those elements, and we concentrate on them, we'll be successful and we'll be able to move ahead with this. Currently, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. Currently, we're doing the Dundee to Newburgh Trail. The board has said that is the priority. And that is what we went out, we secured the grant for it to begin the process. That will take time. How are we going to finance this and how are we going to fund it? Is it going to be done with grants? Are we going to go out and ask the public to provide funds? You have three ways. Well, I would say two ways. I don't think the third way would work. There is a 5-year serial levy that you can go to the voters for, and you can ask. For instance, a 5-year serial levy would be a set amount that would say, for 5 years, you'll fund this. After 5 years, it'll go away unless you reauthorize it. And if we haven't done our job in 5 years, don't vote for it again. So we have 5 years to prove it. That is a serial levy. An example, there is Measure 5, which Measure 50, which is compression. We have no compression in our area. The highest we can have as much as $10 for general government. Currently, the highest place that we have in our district is $8.60 something cents. So we have quite a ways to go. An example, a 10 cents cereal levy. That is, a 10-cent cereal levy would provide for this group and for the district roughly $390,000 a year for 5 years to use for trail construction and maintaining those trails. That would be an example. Now, if we did that, we should set that money aside in a special fund because it can only be used for that, and go after every grant dollar we can get our hands on to improve that. Grants and acquiring that and the levy is a mechanism. That's a helpful mechanism to achieve what you want to do. It's only a mechanism. There is another mechanism, a bond issue. A bond issue, of course, the reason I don't like bond issues is you pay so much interest, and interest will probably be going up. But that is an option. You could say this project, we need 10 million, 20 million. $20 million would be probably, today's term would be 40 to 50 cents per thousand. That's an estimation, but I think it's close. 40 to 50 cents per thousand. Home, as I said, 5-year serial levy would be 10 cents per thousand. That would produce about the 375 to 400,000 a year. Now, there is another way that I'm not sure that would fit, and that is a 10-year capital levy. There are some restrictions on that, and we'd have to get an attorney, but it's a mechanism to say whether we can do that. It's a 10-year capital outlay that for 10 years you would get so much money based on what you decide to go for. So again, those are mechanisms in your structure. So that is a way to achieve what you want to do. But I'm going to go back to that original. Make sure you have a clear purpose. We know what that purpose is, which is to build trails. Make sure the structure works. Should we make any change to the structure? How should we structure this committee? What should you do? Make sure relationships are very important. Relationships, establishing those relationships will be the key. I think it's in any organization. Again, the helpful mechanisms. Begin to list those mechanisms, know what we're going to do. Last but not least, let's make sure we measure and we have benefits, and that we're concentrating on those, and we establish those measurements. And where is the leadership going to come from to hold all this together? And that leadership will change from time to time and should, but it's very important. So I've said enough. I'm sorry for dictating, but any questions or anything anybody wants to ask?
Yeah, I have a couple comments. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
In the run up to this and some of the emails, I was a little bit worried about there being too many projects and too many ideas, but you've added clarity that the board is talking about the Newburgh to Dundee thing, and I think that's helpful. You've told us that you have a $1.8 million grant to build a bridge, and I assume that you have right-of-way along. And so the question that begs is, for the other 3.8 miles where you have right-of-way and you don't need a bridge, how much does it cost? Does a bridge cost 1.8 million? And if not, can some of it go towards building trail along the right-of-way? And how fleshed out is that? And how can this group help you towards that end?
All right. The project, Casey, is involves part of that, and also ODOT, when they built the bypass, they built already a lot of our trail.
Not all of it.
Not
They
all
left
of
the
it,
bridges up.
but most of it.
Does 1.8, is the bridge going to cost 1.8?
It's
No.
a 670-foot bridge, and it has to withstand like an ambulance, and it's ADA. So there's definitely some restrictions in engineering that needs to go into that. They're boring holes right now. They're doing some geotechnical research. Don's been involved with ODOT since, God, I don't know when. Well,
Long
2000,
time.
Early 2000s.
I guess the question is, how fleshed out is the whole thing? Is there money left over from the 1.8 million that's largely going to take care of the trails?
Well, that's the grant. This project that we're doing is 2.6 million.
Okay.
We're still responsible for 800,000 of that.
That's correct.
So
I got it.
in answer to your
Yes.
question, yeah, it's going to take it up. But this trail will connect all the way from the east, like Providence, all the way to the riverfront development that the city's proposing. And Actually, it hooks into Ewing Park.
Mhm.
And the second phase is from, I forget the name of that road, but it's behind Ewing Park. And it'll follow the bypass and carry on out towards Dundee. I think there's,
8th Street in Dundee,
yeah.
where
there's-
that overpass goes, will be the second phase
So
of.
you have 1.8, you need 2.6.
Yeah.
Well, no, we're spending 2.6 currently. ODOT gives you, we had cost calculations done, which, did they get that information, Casey?
Yep.
They did?
Well, this group, no.
Okay, we need to get you those cost calculations for this particular project. So we'll get that to you so that you can see it. We're working with Greenworks, did that. Paula Grimace. As a matter of fact, we can ask Paul to come to one of your meetings and discuss that project with you and get all that information. I think we can do that at the next meeting. I think it'd be good for you to know that, because if you're going to represent, you go out in the community, you need to have the information about what's going on. So can we
Yeah, I'll ask
we
Paul.
do that?
Sure.
And it doesn't necessarily, but somebody from Paul's,
Yeah, he can,
right, he can zoom in
yeah.
and do that. And I think that would be good and give kind of the cost estimate breakdown. We did that. We work with ODOT to do a Tiger grant for exactly what we're doing. We were not successful for that Tiger grant. ODOT wants this done. They're going to work with us. We'll go back to our congressional delegation again. We'll submit, and we have submitted already, requesting funds for the second phase, and hopefully we'll be successful. You're aware of the infrastructure bill that is going on. Our congressional delegation knows about that. They have support from ODOT. We have support from ODOT to do that. So it's not like we're out there by ourselves because we can't do anything. You will know that this committee also supports this project that we're on right now. We went out, we felt going on our own would not be successful, so we asked the bypass committee to support that, which they have and will continue. So if need be, we can always set up a tour. We did that with the bypass committee and the city of Newburgh and the board. We gave a tour and explained with a bus exactly what we were going to do with this particular grant. And I'll be honest with you, when we submitted that grant, I've got to say, I did not think we would get it. I really didn't. I thought it was a long shot.
Well, they said no the first time, Don.
Yeah. And just by, again, being in the right place at the right time, we got the money. And 1.8 million is a lot of money. We can do a lot. So we submitted it and was very fortunate. And ODOT is on board now. They know what our total plan is from 8th Street in Dundee that will connect all the way to the hospital, Fred Meyer's, and that whole works. Now also, there is a urban renewal plan for the city of Newburgh. And that urban renewal also is down by the river, and there's connections and trails and money appropriated for part of that when that comes about. And the idea is to connect it to the property that we own down on 219. Right as you cross the bridge, we own on both sides. Yes, Jim.
So, two things. First is, so we have a clear easement. How many more bridges do we need to put on the side? Two
Two.
more, correct? So we're talking that much more money for those next few bridges. I just need to make sure everyone's
Yep.
clear on that.
Right.
More than just this one bridge to get across, to get all the way down.
So
The second,
2.6 million doesn't cover the whole thing?
No.
absolutely.
No, no.
So is it times 2 or 3 then to get those 2 or 3?
Times
bridges? Is that what I'm
3.
hearing?
Probably
Well, times
three.
2.
Times 2.
Three.
Okay.
So that's the one thing I just want to be, because I'm not sure if it was clear on that. You've got one bridge and you've got at least two more, plus the paving, plus the grading. And part of the grading's there because I did a bench
Right.
along the road.
11th Street's done all the way down to River Street. We have to do a railroad crossing. That's expensive. Bridge and what about Main Road, industrial down to where we're tying the bridge across Winooski.
So with that said, I just wanted to make sure that everyone's clear that it's got quite a bit more to go funding wise. And Don alluded to what I was involved with the aquatic center when I was working for the park district, is that the folks that were involved in the aquatic center and getting the new one built came to me and came to Don. And when they came to me, I said, the community has to drive this. The Park and Recreation District is not going to drive this. The board of directors didn't want to drive it. That's kind of where it was. So they got a large amount of people interested. They got together and they took a year to educate people on what we were doing. And then I think it passed by 63%, but there were people involved in that. It was very organized and they were very structured and very focused on what they wanted to do. If we're talking the amount of money we're talking about here, which is what, maybe 6 million by the time it's all said and done?
Right. There is the main route that we're talking about now, Jim, will be in the neighborhood of 6 million.
Right, that's from 8th Street all the way to
Right.
past the new bridge going towards Fred
Right.
Meyer. Right, that's the whole project.
But that will be the most expensive by far. The rest of it can be done. Some of it we've done in-house already. I think the plan you got said roughly $88 million rings a bell to complete the 50-something miles.
Yeah.
So all the trails. throughout the
Yeah,
district.
that's a lot of money. And it scares people. But it's a lot of that can be done with grants, with other things. Not all that money has to come locally. So as we get into this, 20 years from now, we'll definitely be working on this because I've been working on it for over 20 years just to get the idea out there, to get the partners and begin to pull this together and go with it. So
So Don, what I'm hearing is that I wasn't here for the first meeting, but I get the sense that you've got we had 17 very excited people that love trails and just want to see trails.
right,
And we didn't necessarily have some clarity of purpose. And what we're hearing is some of that purpose from the board, which is you need help with those 4 or 5 areas. So we've got our purpose, but we need to be thinking, and we've got a structure. So we don't necessarily need to be thinking about breaking up into subcommittees at this point. Am I correct in that?
well, that's something you guys could decide how your structure will be with yours. How would that lend itself and what would be the best way to achieve you know, what ultimately you would like to do.
There are, I'm gonna bring this up too, because this is an opportunity for them. There are connections that need to be made to certain other facilities, like Friends Park. We'd like to get down there from this bypass trail. Like I said, we already have a connection at Ewing.
Where's Friends Park?
Friends Park is down off of, just down over here.
Behind,
It's Corinne.
down the
Yes,
ravine behind the
Corinne
airport.
So that's an 8-acre park that's really kind of a neighborhood park because nobody really knows it's down there, and it's,
I do, I remember.
And if you go in the neighborhood, we've already built areas that connect the neighborhood out and those, so a lot of those things have been built, and we early on got with George Fox College, by which eventually, how are we going to make the connections and do all that? And so there's been a lot of different legwork done, segments around. The golf course is another area where I don't know if you've been out there or not, but those trails are really used. Bob can contest to that. They get a lot of use. And we did that all in-house. And we built that. But how do we take these built areas and connect them to each other? Again, not to get on the soapbox, but building social capital in a community is crucial. And the best way to build that social capital is with trails and committees and those type things. When you build your relationships with the different groups, will be building that social capital in the community. It's crucial. For a community to be successful, that's the way that you can become successful as a community. And it's all about building that social capital. It's not about agreeing. It's not about disagreeing. It's about building that connectivity or that social capital where you're talking with one another.
Don, I think at some point it'd be good if the staff, it doesn't have to be tonight, but if the staff could tell us what some of these community connections are and neighborhood developments that are anticipated or hoped for, how they could be brought into this master plan. I mean, you're talking about a feeder system into the main trail system maybe, but I think a lot of us have ideas for things in our local areas that we'd like to see included in at least being given some attention and review.
yeah, that's why all these, it was recommended that you read the M. Hillis master plan, because a lot of these are incorporated in that. And I can certainly get Kat to send out information on connections that need to be made, things that have already been done. Just kind of a review of what the park district's done in the last 10 years, more or less. So that's kind of when all this really kind of started up.
I agree with your statement, Bob, and we need to do that. The reason we got involved in the Yamhillis Trail is through Dundee, that connection with the Abbey, and from the Abbey, where do we go? And we connect to the Yamhillis Trail, and the Yamhillis Trail connects to that. And I don't know if you're aware, but there's a larger plan from Portland that goes along the hill all the way to the coast. Right. It goes all the way to the coast. And when we began our process, we reached out to our partners and we began to gather information because we didn't want to plan in a vacuum. We wanted to know what was going on around us so that we could make sure that we connected and had the connections necessary by which to make this successful, and also count on these partners to back us or support us in our endeavors as we supported them in their endeavors. Which, what's that?
Quentin has his hand raised.
Yes, Quentin.
Yeah, before we get too far, I just want to re-clarify the clear purpose or the charge of the committee. Was that physically voted on and determined by the board already? Because I think as we move forward with even these discussions, it would be nice to understand all 6 points of your wonderfully crafted framework for us. Because I think, moving forward, if we're talking Chehalem heritage trails, looking at your master plan, that goes beyond just connecting Newburgh and Dundee, but I think you mentioned earlier that that was the main project right now, correct?
That's correct. But
So then
it goes.
is there a broader charge to this committee, or is that what has been determined as this first 2-year charge? Is that specific project?
When we started this project, we realized right away that we needed to involve the community more. We saw a lack of communications with the community. So let's go out, establish a citizen board, but at the same time, we don't want to abandon what we've already done. If you're strongly opposed to that, let us know. We're not trying to direct you on what to do or not do. We kind of signed a contract for the grant, so we're kind of stuck with this part, but we couldn't afford at the time. We were talking about forming the committee and this opportunity came along, and we just, like I said, we grabbed it or shot for it without really realizing that we would get it. We were shocked, but we got it.
I think the Newburgh to Dundee Trail is a fantastic idea. You had mentioned earlier, back in the 80s, connecting the river through that existing bridge. That is also something I think people will be very excited about in the community. Do you think it'd be too much to promote both of those ideas? Like, would they detract from each other? Should we focus like a laser beam on the Newburgh Dundee? Or would that connection across the river be something that we should also go out and promote at the same time, or wait?
As a group, as you establish your partnership, like this Newburgh to Dundee, our main partners is the city of Newburgh, the city of Dundee, and also ODOT. The bridge across the river will probably involve state parks and the city of Newburgh, and probably Marion County as well. So you can begin to establish your relationships and go from there. Quentin, I hope I answered your question. You guys really get to decide that. We just kind of had this pop up before we formed the committee, and we just wanted to go ahead with it if that made sense.
Yeah, and I think, from my perspective, I think that is certainly getting such a great opportunity in that grant to focus on that. And perhaps as we look at the structure and building those relationships, as you mentioned, and using mechanisms, perhaps it's a phase, we look at things in phases, whereas if we're, primarily focused on this Newburgh to Dundee project that you've got started, and then we get near the completion or, we've acquired the rest of the funding, the $800,000 that you're talking about, maybe that's when we start having conversations about what's the next project, and we just have overlapping phases to whereas we start to fund and finish one project, we look at what's the next one. And I think that's where we started talking last week, and we had some discussion in email chain about potential subcommittees. And I think at least thinking about it in a systems approach and having potentially 3, or at least having people meet to where we have maybe a planning or envisioning group, and then one that looks at the finances, grant writing was mentioned also, and then maybe one that's volunteer and outreach based, and at least look at those as pots that we can stick people who have the willingness to put that effort forward on whatever project the overall subcommittee decides.
I would agree with that. You're developing a structure that you can work with, and I think that's very positive. Getting older, I'm having one of those senior moments where I was thinking something and forgot what I was thinking. Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, really quick, so, if you get a bike path done, a nice one, like the one along the bypass, get it done, it's gonna draw people to say, hey, we want more of this. Right now, we have nothing really like that. There's one in Champouy, but right here, no.
Mm-hmm.
If this committee, and I'm speaking from a board member position, if this committee would look at that and really focus on completing that big project, it could span off into these other projects pretty easily, because people are going to see the worth of it for the 2 communities and for the county. So you've got money already. You can basically use that money to apply for more grants as matching and continue on and roller coaster down this thing. So I think that's something we can look at, because I don't know of any other trails that we have financing for in grants. Let's try something up his sleeve.
Well, one of the things I wanted to say, and I remembered now being a senior, Quentin's statement about the subcommittees. One of the things I've always told our board, and I've always believed, when you set priorities, don't let it rule. Don't let opportunities come and ignore them because you're only concentrating on this deal and this is the priority. We may have opportunities. For instance, with your trail, if there's property owners wanting to give land or something, and we can go ahead and establish that, I see that as a great opportunity. And I say, let's move ahead. Let's not let that opportunity pass us by. I would also agree, Jim, that I think we need to definitely center in on this project as well, but let's not, in the process of prioritizing, cut out all of these other possibilities. There are people in the community that's their last concern, but their particular trail is their first concern. And if we can work with them, and I'm hoping the committee will be flexible, and I know you will be, to where we have that flexibility, I think it'll take us a long ways. And as I said, one of the mechanisms will be the financing and how we go about that.
I saw what y'all did with the pool and I thought it was brilliant. And it seems like that's what you're asking this group for. But you mentioned all the federal spending and infrastructure bill, which I assume that your board has relationships for and will pursue those things independent of this group, number one. And number two, you have a sense of that's going to be determined in the next year or so?
The infrastructure bill, the funding will be the first priority. And once they do that, then from that funding will come the opportunities. We don't know what the funding amount in those opportunities will be. There are probably people on this committee that knows our senators, our representatives. You will be talking with them, their staff. it's important that we keep that out there, that you mention it to them. That's the way things get done. If they hear it, they respond.
So your board and this group will both do it.
Yes.
So the community can.
In other words, I think as we go along, the more we speak as one, the better off we are. In other words, I think at the last meeting, there was some discussion about immunity or,
Yeah, they had some questions for us as far as liabilities of owners and the district as far as easements. And I've talked to our lawyer today and clarified some of that. So as long as people aren't, if we have an easement or an agreement with the person, as long as they're not charging people to cross his property or use his property, he is immune from any liability, and we are as well. Then I asked John also about whether committee members such as yourselves can go out in the community and represent CPRD. And that just has to be formalized by the board as to whether we can give you the access to go and represent CPRD in the neighborhood if you're talking to neighbors or that kind of thing. So those were two questions that came up. So I think I answered them.
Yeah, very helpful. If I were a property owner, I'd be nervous to give a permanent easement. Is there such thing as a temporary easement?
Yep, there are
yes,
temporary easements.
we have
Permits.
easements currently with property owners that can end tomorrow. They'll pick up the phone and call me. They may never end. They may stay in perpetuity. We're working with various. We work nationally as well as the state of Oregon, because the city of Portland had an issue with right of ways, and they were sued, and it went to the Supreme Court. And that was part of the idea. The legislature went back after it went to Supreme Court and corrected our local legislation to provide that immunity for the entities. The district also has immunity, and so does the city of Portland now. Now, no one has immunity for negligence. That doesn't exist, but under normal circumstances, as long as there's no charge, the Supreme Court said there's immunity. So, and the legislature backed that up with what they passed.
And then if you're building a trail, say on an easement, and one of your workers injures themselves with a saw, are they gonna,
Well, that's on us.
that's on us, okay. So
We
you
have,
have umbrella
we have,
insurance
we have workers'
Right.
compensation for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
for the volunteers.
Yeah, that's why we do sign up volunteers so that they are covered under our insurance.
Great.
So I printed out some information for you, and I was hoping, I think Kat sent some of it out this morning, but she didn't have access to all of it because I didn't receive some of this until later. So I'll make sure that you get these documents as a group. One of them is the laws. It's ORS 105.68.682 and 105.688, and that discusses immunity and that kind of thing. And also we found, and I don't know if Kat was going to reach out to Mendocino Land Trust. It's about trail development and public outreach and that type of information that might be helpful for all of you. And like
Yeah.
Don said, don't ever let opportunities go by. There are things that happen and things that aren't great timing, but sometimes they get dropped in your lap and you just kind of have to go with it.
We do have the foundation if someone needs tax write-offs or those type things with easements or those type. For instance, I don't know, most people don't realize that the golf course was donated, the land. And what we did was we started with conservation easement. And the property owner was in a situation where they wanted the tax break, but when you get a tax break, you have like 6 years of capital gains. And so they were not going to start the project for about 3 or 4 years. So we did an agreement whereby they got the lease or the conservation easement. They were able to take some taxes off. Then after they began their project, they donated the property and they had 6 years by which to take off the rest of it. And it was a good deal for them. It was a great deal for the community and a good deal for the district, because we look for those opportunities where everybody wins, not just a win-win, but everybody wins. And they're out there. And as you go out in the community and you begin to meet with various people, those opportunities will pop up. And same deal with the grants and our elected officials. What I'm hearing at your next meeting, we'll have Paul to talk about the current project and have the data, if that meets everyone's okay. Does anyone object to that? If not, and we'll send the data out ahead of time. I'll get Kat to send that out before your next meeting so that you can ask him any questions if you need it.
Just one more, I'm sorry.
Sure.
Ag land, private ag land, if somebody were to give an easement for a trail and then they were to be, say, sued for a land use issue, would the CPRD be backing that up, or would that private landowner?
Why would they be sued for land
Well,
use?
isn't that kind of what's happening with the West Side, or am I not understanding it? No.
They didn't reach out to the people that were, as Don calls them, peers.
Yeah, the piers, so I guess, so somebody, so it has to be, because it's their land that they're putting the easement on, but an adjacent farmer that doesn't have the trail on, but they don't like trails for whatever reason, they wouldn't be able to stop it or sue for it?
As best I understand it, and please understand, I'm giving you my understanding. I'm not saying it's factual. So I'm giving you my understanding. With that particular situation, the county went and they filed a land use. What occurred was they sent it back to the county for some adjustments. The county made no adjustments and decided to do away with the whole thing. That's the best that. Now, would they have been successful? I don't know that. I think my guess is, based on what I know about land use, is that when we started developing the golf course, there was people all over this state, including the governor's office, that said there'd never be a golf course there. I objected. The reason is I think protection of farmland, I totally agree with. 100%. But communities must grow. And when you're surrounded by farmland, how do you grow? You got to use some farmland. There's no other way to do it. There are 8 other goals in the state that's just as important as that goal. And that's what I base mine on. There's 8 additional goals. How do you ignore the 8 for the 1? That doesn't make sense to me. Shouldn't you consider all 9 goals? Wasn't that the purpose? Since when did we only concentrate on 1 goal? And I made that statement and I stuck to it. What happened was they sent it to our mediation. I mediated with the peers and we came up with the solution and we were able to do it. I think with your question about land use, we'll have simply that. I think you go through the process, you sit down with people, you listen, you mediate, you try to take their interest. You don't tell them they don't know what they're talking about or they're wrong. You're making an assumption there. You listen and you work with them and you try to come up with something. And that's what we did with the golf course. And we were so successful. I won a lot of lunches and dinners off of that deal because people thought we'd never do it, but we did it.
So Justin Patterson has his hand raised.
Oh, yes. Justin.
Yeah, can you hear me, Don?
Yes.
Okay, I apologize if this was stated earlier and I missed it. The $2.6 million ODOT project that you've got, is that used exclusive, or is it meant to go exclusively for that bridge? And I assume the approach is on either side. And then can you clarify the length of that bridge? That is a 600 and some odd foot span that is for bike and ped and the ability to support a vehicle?
Right. The grant, ODOT, has to support an ambulance. That's what they wanted, so that's what we had to do to get the grant. And again, Justin, the Paul will be here at your next meeting and we'll discuss the total project, the total cost or the breakdown of that. The bridge did not cost 2.6 million. There was other segments of that. We have to build a couple of other connections. What was nice about it was ODOT, knowing what we were doing, built a lot of it already for us. So that was very good. Otherwise, it would have been much costlier. Does that answer your question, Justin?
Yeah, I think so. If Paul's coming at the next meeting, we can, maybe get further clarification then.
Yes, he would be the one. And again, we're going to send out some information about the project and give you the grant application, which will explain all that and help out. So you'll be receiving that.
Thanks, Don.
Yes, Quentin.
Yeah, I appreciate the additional details. I do want to circle back and see if we can try and solidify a structure in which that we can move forward, because I think as we're starting to have these conversations, it would probably be insightful for us to do so. And I personally, again, think that, having perhaps those 3 subcommittees that can, break up once we have more information potentially from the next meeting into something like a planning and envisioning that might look towards newer projects or opportunities. While it sounds like as we get information about the ongoing project, a finance and grant writing and a volunteer and outreach committees could start work on finding the additional 800,000 or more in matching funding for the grant and the current project, and also the volunteer force and the educational aspect that you talked about, similar to the pool. Because I think, as you mentioned, I can't remember if it was you, Jim, but as we finish this first $2.6 million project, during and after the public support, we should focus on building that outreach and getting folks to use it and to appreciate it and to get involved through volunteering in future projects. But I think I know that a lot of us were eager in the last meeting to look at. I know there's an individual on this committee that really likes the Chehalem Mountains and Parent Mountain trails and how those can connect the heritage trails. And I think, potentially having folks on 1 or 2 subcommittees of this one that can look at envisioning, while others who are like myself, who would be willing to volunteer and assist with grant writing and finding additional funding sources, they can get to work on the current project. Because I don't want anyone to feel left out or lost interest in the overall committee. But I think, again, having the charge from the board to look at a priority of the Newburgh to Dundee section, but still, I believe it's on the website, it's the Heritage Trails group, and I think that we should embody that as a whole as well. So I don't know if we need to take that to a motion at some point, but I think before we get too deep, we should probably establish that. And as you guys were talking about, figure out if we are agents of this district, so we can start the work on the ground and building those relationships, which would therefore be the next step.
Can I piggyback a little bit off that? I wasn't here last at the first meeting, but in my mind, based on some of that really great framework that Don shared with us, it doesn't seem to me to make sense to break up in 2 different ways. Is that what you're saying, Quentin, that we should be thinking kind of overall general process and general system for kind of running projects through various subcommittees instead of thinking of specific geographic areas? And to me, the geographic area, it made sense at first, but based on today, it does not make sense to me, breaking up by geography or specific trails. Does anyone have a different opinion on that?
I think you guys should continue to discuss this, because I don't think you're ready to break up into subcommittees, and do it as a whole until you feel like you're comfortable with what your focus is and what each one of your interests are. There are, like I said, don't let opportunities go by. They're going to be out there. There's always volunteer groups up at the Riley property. There's always groups willing to do volunteer, blackberry removal or trail maintenance and that kind of stuff. So don't let go of that. And then there's the primary focus right now is being
So it doesn't sound to me like we necessarily need a motion at this point. We just continue on as the committee.
Well, once you're informed of everything that you should be informed of, there's a lot of information here.
Yeah.
The bypass is a lot of information. So, and I know enough about it and I could explain it to you, but I think it would be better coming from Paul. He's worked on this since 2009. He was part of the Trails Master Plan. So, it's a lot more involved than just a 670-foot bridge. Let me just put it that way. I think it ties together like 9,000 lineal feet of pathway. Some existing, some, and there's a railroad crossing in there. That's almost $500,000 right there. Mm-hmm. So we've been working with the city still and got some information from the city. We're set to have a meeting with them. When are we doing that? 21st, I think. talking about industrial, because we have to come up there and figure out whether we want to use industrial or whether the, the traffic's pretty heavy. Is there another route that we can use that might be better? So yeah, there's lots of information.
Could I speak?
Sure.
Sure, Pete.
Pete,
I think we're a little early. I think we need to get a lot more education within the committee.
Yep.
And get everyone up to speed, and maybe at least two, I would say, maybe 3 more meetings to be up to speed, maybe take a tour. We decide after talking with Paul. And then kind of start to flesh out how we want to approach it as a committee.
Yeah.
I think we're way too early. There's a lot of ideas flying around yet. We have a couple different frameworks, or to come up with a single framework would be fantastic. And I think we can look at both approaches too, that the priority is the Newburgh D, but there's all those connectors that maybe can be done at the concurrent. So, it's not, even though the board has made that their priority, that does not mean that the things that drew a lot of people to the committee in the first place are still viable. It's not just, we're a separate entity in some respects, and that's actually, the pool committee was quite a separate entity. From the
we're losing you, Pete.
I don't know why, but I just wanted to say thanks for the clarity.
You're welcome, and I'm not sure my things. I may have put more mud in there, but I'm hoping this committee will clarify things. Yeah. And that's what's important. And there's people out in the community that we need to reach out to, because they have a lot of great ideas. And if we can develop that social capital that we need, we'll be successful, providing we do that. I know that there are people that want to move faster, and I think that's important too. How the structure, I like Quentin's idea of the subcommittees. I think that's where we're going to have to go eventually. I'm not sure this committee's ready yet. That's your choice. I like his idea of developing the subcommittees and developing a structure. I think that's important. The question is, do we know exactly what the total purpose is, and is it clear? And the committee not all committee members may be there yet to where we can establish that and move ahead. I think it's clear to say everyone is interested in trails. There's no one that I've heard that says no trails, even though we need to involve them at some point. But that's where we're at. Did you guys set a time limit on your meetings?
It was an hour last time.
Yeah, we've gone. Yeah, I will tell Paul to keep that so that we go. So thank you, guys.
Do we have to approve the previous minutes also?
Yeah, Kat had that in her minutes that we approved last meeting
Yes.
minutes.
All
Yes.
right,
I move to approve last meeting's minutes.
Second,
Who's acting as the chair?
I am. What am I supposed to say? I forgot.
But you're supposed to say motion approved.
Motion approved.
all right.
And
And
then,
then, Chair, you can dismiss us.
okay. Who was the volunteers for the Zoom, for doing the Zoom meeting, training?
We have,
We provided Richard.
we provided Richard, and Richard's writing a manual that will be available so that we can get people trained. And it's better to have it in writing so
Okay.
that they can meet with Richard and we can go from there. One of the commitments is at all your meetings, we'll have at least one member of the staff there, always.
Perfect. All right, then. Meeting adjourned.
With the understanding that next meeting will be November 10th, is that correct? 6 o'clock?
Second Wednesday.
Second Wednesday.
Hey, this is Justin real quick. I just wanted to
It's be the
make a
10th,
point.
yes.
Those of us that are participating remotely, there's a ton of static on our end.
Yep.
So just a heads up. I don't know what that means logistically or whatnot, but there's been a lot of comments that have just been, can't hear a thing. because of the
All right.
static on our end. Just FYI.
Thanks.
Thanks.
hi, Michelle. Hi. Matt, great to meet you.
I'm